The corridor of the maternity ward smelled of antiseptic and warm linen, a strange mix of sterility and new beginnings. Alina lay pale and exhausted on the narrow hospital bed, her newborn daughter sleeping beside her in a transparent crib. The hours of labor had drained every ounce of strength from her, yet the quiet rhythm of the baby's breathing gave her a fragile sense of peace. That peace shattered the moment the door swung open and her mother-in-law stepped inside, heels clicking sharply against the tile as if announcing a verdict. From the first day of Alina's marriage, Galina Petrovna had made it clear she disapproved. Too quiet, too poor, not ambitious enough for her son, those judgments had always lingered in the air. Now, standing in the maternity ward, she looked around with thinly veiled contempt, eyes flicking from the bed to the crib as though evaluating a flawed purchase. Without so much as a greeting, she declared that Alina had no right to stay here any longer than necessary. The child, she insisted, should be taken home immediately, and Alina should stop pretending to be fragile. Alina tried to sit up, her voice trembling as she reminded her that the doctor had ordered rest, that complications after birth were not a joke. Galina waved a dismissive hand. She spoke loudly, deliberately, making sure the nurses passing by could hear. She accused Alina of trapping her son with a baby, of using weakness as a weapon, of being a burden rather than a wife. Each word struck harder than the last, and Alina felt tears sting her eyes, not from pain but from humiliation. When Alina whispered that her husband had promised to come later that day, Galina laughed sharply. "He won't," she said. "He has more important things to do. You're alone now. Don't fool yourself." Then came the cruelest line of all, delivered with a cold smile. "You're rushing to the wrong station, dear. Life doesn't stop here for people like us." Just as Galina turned toward the door, convinced she had won, footsteps echoed in the hallway. A man entered the room, tall, calm, and unmistakably authoritative. It was the hospital's chief physician, accompanied by a uniformed security officer and, moments later, Alina's husband, his face tight with anger. Galina froze mid-stride, her mouth opening slightly, words failing her for the first time. The doctor spoke first, his tone firm but controlled. He explained that he had received complaints from staff about inappropriate behavior toward a patient. Hospital policy, he said, did not allow harassment, intimidation, or emotional abuse, especially in a maternity ward. The security officer politely but decisively informed Galina that she would need to leave immediately and that future visits would require explicit permission from both the patient and medical staff. Alina's husband finally spoke, his voice low and shaking. He told his mother that he had heard everything. That the years of subtle cruelty, the constant interference, ended here. He chose his wife and child, and if Galina could not respect that, she would have no place in their lives. Galina's face drained of color. For a woman who had always controlled the narrative, being confronted so publicly left her speechless. When she was escorted out, the room felt lighter, as if someone had opened a window. Alina broke down then, silent tears sliding down her cheeks as her husband held her hand and apologized again and again. The baby stirred softly, unaware that a quiet but decisive battle had just been won on her behalf. Later that same morning, in a world far removed from the hospital's sterile calm, another confrontation was unfolding under bright studio lights. Viewers tuning into a live morning television interview sensed tension almost immediately. Carrie Underwood, known for her composure and professionalism, sat opposite a host whose questions seemed to push relentlessly at sensitive topics. What began as a routine conversation reportedly grew strained, the atmosphere tightening with every exchange. According to people present in the studio, the tone shifted when personal boundaries were crossed. Carrie's polite smiles faded, her answers grew shorter, and finally she paused, taking a breath that spoke volumes. She stated calmly that she was there to discuss her work, not to be cornered or disrespected. When the questioning continued, she stood up, thanked the crew, and walked off the set, leaving a stunned silence behind. The moment spread rapidly across social media, sparking debates about respect, pressure, and the expectations placed on women, especially women in the public eye. Some praised her for standing her ground, while others argued about professionalism and live television etiquette. Yet for many viewers, the image of a woman choosing dignity over compliance resonated deeply. In different settings, under vastly different circumstances, the stories echoed one another. Alina, in a hospital room, and Carrie, in a television studio, faced versions of the same challenge, being pushed beyond acceptable limits by people who assumed authority over them. One confrontation involved family power dynamics, the other media pressure, but both ended with a refusal to stay silent. As Alina watched sunlight creep across the hospital wall, she felt something new settle in her chest, not fear, but resolve. She understood now that strength did not always roar, sometimes it arrived quietly, with the right person stepping in at the right moment. Galina Petrovna had come to the hospital expecting obedience and control, but she left confronted by boundaries she could no longer ignore. And somewhere else, millions watching their morning screens were reminded that even in the glare of fame, walking away can be an act of courage. Different lives, different stages, the same truth. No one gets to decide your worth or your place. Not in a family, not in a studio, not anywhere at all. The maternity ward was unusually quiet that morning, the kind of quiet that settles only after a long night of cries, footsteps, and whispered instructions. Soft light filtered through the narrow window, illuminating the pale walls and the small crib beside the bed. Alina lay still, her body aching, her mind foggy with exhaustion, yet her eyes never left her newborn daughter. Every tiny movement of the baby felt miraculous, as if the world had narrowed to this single fragile life and the steady beating of Alina's own heart. That fragile calm did not last long. The door opened abruptly, without a knock, and Galina Petrovna entered as though she owned not only the room but the entire floor. Her expression was hard, her posture rigid, and from the very first second it was clear she had not come to congratulate or to help. She scanned the room with open disapproval, lips pressed into a thin line, and then fixed her gaze on Alina. "You're still here," she said sharply, as if Alina had overstayed her welcome at a dinner party rather than recovering from childbirth. "I thought by now you would have been discharged. There's no reason to lie around pretending to be weak." Alina tried to answer calmly. Her voice was barely above a whisper, weakened by fatigue and pain. She explained that the doctor recommended observation, that the birth had been difficult. Galina waved her words away, pacing the room, her heels striking the floor in an almost aggressive rhythm. She spoke louder, criticizing, accusing, turning Alina's vulnerability into evidence of her supposed incompetence. "You always have excuses," Galina said. "First pregnancy, then recovery. My son needs a wife, not a patient. And this child," she glanced at the crib, "is no reason to stop living properly." The words cut deeper than Alina expected. Tears welled up, but she refused to let them fall. She had learned long ago that crying in front of her mother-in-law only fueled more cruelty. Still, when Galina declared that Alina should leave the hospital immediately and stop embarrassing the family, something inside her cracked. This was supposed to be a place of safety, a moment of transition into motherhood, not another battlefield. Galina leaned closer, lowering her voice just enough to sound intimate and poisonous at the same time. She told Alina that her son was already tired of her complaints, that he would not come today, maybe not tomorrow. Then she delivered her final blow with a faint, satisfied smile. "You're rushing to the wrong station," she said. "Life moves on. Don't expect anyone to wait for you." For a few seconds, the room seemed to hold its breath. Then the door opened again. This time, Galina did not control the moment. The head nurse entered first, her expression stern, followed by the chief physician and a security guard. Behind them stood Alina's husband. His face was pale, his jaw clenched, his eyes locked on his mother. Galina turned, startled, her confidence faltering as she realized she was no longer the one in charge. The doctor spoke clearly, outlining that hospital staff had received multiple complaints about inappropriate behavior. He emphasized that emotional pressure on a postpartum patient was unacceptable. The nurse added that Alina had every right to rest and recover without interference. The security guard's presence made the message unmistakable. Alina's husband finally broke the silence. His voice shook, not with fear but with anger he had suppressed for years. He told his mother that he had heard enough, that her words were no longer tolerated. He chose his wife and child, and if Galina could not respect that choice, she would lose access to their lives. Galina opened her mouth to protest, but no words came. For once, she was speechless. When she was escorted out, the tension drained from the room like air from a punctured balloon. Alina felt her composure collapse. Silent sobs shook her shoulders as her husband took her hand, apologizing for not stopping his mother sooner. The baby stirred softly, unaware that her first days in the world had already been marked by conflict and resolution. Hours later, in a completely different setting, another woman faced a confrontation of her own. Bright studio lights replaced hospital lamps, and cameras replaced medical equipment, but the underlying pressure was strikingly similar. Carrie Underwood sat across from a morning show host, her posture poised, her smile practiced. At first, the interview flowed smoothly, touching on music, projects, and routine topics. Gradually, the questions shifted. They became more pointed, more personal. Subtle at first, then increasingly uncomfortable. Carrie's expression changed, her answers carefully measured as she tried to steer the conversation back to safer ground. The host persisted, pressing on sensitive issues that clearly crossed an unspoken boundary. Viewers watching live could sense the discomfort. Carrie paused, inhaled slowly, and then did something unexpected. She addressed the situation directly, stating that she was there to discuss her work, not to be put on the spot about private matters. When the questioning did not stop, she stood up, thanked the crew politely, and walked off the set. The studio fell into stunned silence. Within minutes, clips of the moment spread across social media, igniting fierce discussion. Some criticized her decision, while many more applauded her for refusing to endure disrespect. The walkout became a symbol, not of anger, but of self-respect. Though Alina would never see the studio lights or feel the weight of millions of eyes watching her, the connection between the two moments was undeniable. Both women were pushed into corners by people who believed they had the right to demand more than was fair. Both chose, in their own ways, to reclaim control. As evening settled over the maternity ward, Alina watched her daughter sleep, the tiny chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. She felt different now. The fear that had followed her for months loosened its grip. She understood that boundaries were not acts of rebellion but acts of survival. Galina Petrovna had tried to dominate the most vulnerable moment of her life and failed. And somewhere far away, a singer walking off a television set reminded the world that even under scrutiny, even under pressure, walking away can be the strongest statement of all. Different stories, different stages, but the same quiet truth echoed through them both: dignity is not something given. It is something claimed.